So, bonjour, здравейте, hello everyone, and we have a guest, special guest again, Luca Ranieri. Hi, from the channel. I hope I'm not gonna butcher this. Scorpio Marcianus.
It's good.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah, thank you. I'm trying.
So we'll be super excited to talk about Latin and ancient Greek today.
As am I.
Great. So first, can you please introduce yourself and what you do?
Yeah, well, like you said, I'm Luke Ranieri. I'm American, and for whatever strange reason, I've fallen in love with Latin and ancient Greek, and they're incredibly fun and interesting in a lot of ways. I also like modern languages. I've studied a few, and the what's interesting, I think, about the study of those ancient languages is through plays and other texts, we can see just how much ancient peoples were like us. In some ways, certainly different. They had conventions and things that are just totally bizarre. And I don't know about you, but I'm not interested in using a communal toilet brush as the Romans would in their public baths. But other than that, for the most part, people are people. And like they say in Russian, люди как люди. And they it's the way the sense of humor works, the things that make sense to them as people is very much how we do. So it's whenever we have more chances to experience information of the human experience, whether ancient or modern, I think it gives us a better opportunity to go through our own lives, either personally or collectively as a society.
Great, thank you.
Great stuff.
And how can you possibly know how these languages were pronounced?
Oh, my favorite topic. Well, yeah, I'm very much into studying the phonology of ancient languages like Latin and Greek. And yeah, so we have wonderful amounts of information. Something that's often said as to people who are attempting to reconstruct an ancient pronunciation were things like, "Oh, you don't have a tape recording of the ancient of ancient Greek or Latin. How on earth could you possibly know?" Actually, well, they don't even ask the question. Such people usually just say, "You can't know because there's no recording. Therefore, use a traditional national pronunciation," in which case would be, say, the ecclesiastical pronunciation in Italy of Latin, or the liturgical or modern Greek pronunciation of Greek in Greece. Now, love the sound of both of those pronunciations, and I can also pronounce Latin and ancient Greek using the pronunciation systems that are traditional in those two countries. But they happen to be, they're great. They're not wrong at all. They're just a convention. Everything's just a convention. Just like when you were both learning English, you either were exposed to British English or American English or both. At some point, you may have had to choose one pronunciation or another, and they're just conventions, and you don't have to be perfect at them either. So they're just conventions so we can communicate. It doesn't really matter, and it's not like one is more right or wrong. Though I really like British pronunciation, and I wouldn't mind if all foreigners learn British pronunciation for English instead of American. But yeah, I mean, I think it sounds great. That's fine. But you could do whatever, and it works. And but yeah, how do we actually know then? And the way that we know is through a lot of evidence, in the same way that we know that the organization of the continents on the planet used to be all together in one big piece called Pangea, for example. That was figured out like just a few decades ago. Like it's not a recent thing. That we've not known that for a long time. That's a very recently understood thing. And we figured that out through lots of pieces of evidence, both directly observed and inferred, and all these kinds of things. That's how when we're trying to reconstruct part of the past scientifically, and like in linguistic science, you use a lot of information. And one of the best resources to start with is, what do the ancient peoples themselves do? Especially if they deliberately and specifically comment on pronunciation. Both the ancient Romans, of course, I include Greeks in the Roman Empire, so they're kind of Romans too. even just a couple hundred years ago, the Greeks would refer to their language as Romaiki, so it's the Roman language, which is cool. But and some still do in northern Anatolia, northern Turkey, the Pontic Greek. They still call their language Romaiki, not I don't know, Ellinika or something, even though it is a dialect of modern Greek. So so that is to say the ancient Roman or ancient Greek grammarians, they speak sometimes very specifically, extremely specifically about pronunciation things. What they lack is the sophistication of modern linguistic terminology, because they're really just commenting like any intelligent person. For example, if you got someone who's not linguistically trained to describe their own language, that would be the result. They would describe certain things and they would make certain inferences where they would not realize certain characteristics. One that's important, for example, that you probably picked up a while ago when studying English, is that native English speakers, we add aspiration to an initial unvoiced occlusive, like a k. So like a what's a good, I think a good example has k, or pa, like papa, for example. And papa, which is a nice universal word, that first pa has to have extra air on it to sound like a native English speaker. It's something that we have in common with German as well. Modern German does that, and some other Germanic languages, not all of them. We do that. And now, as a native speaker of such a language, that's not something I easily perceive until I'm exposed to lots of, say, Frenchmen or Bulgarians or Italians or Spaniards who don't do that. And I'm like, huh, that's funny. It sounds like they're doing, like, to my brain, in fact, I just had a class where a student commented on this. It sounds like when I say ka or pa, now to you, having languages which have those sounds normally in the beginning of a word, you're like, yeah, that's just ka, pa. But to a native English speaker, we've said, like, is that a ga or is that a ka? Like, it sounds like it's in between. In fact, some will even say it sounds more like a ga or a ba than it does like ka or pa, which is how we normally would say them in isolation. So that's those are things that a native speaker, and we have Latin native speakers talking about Latin. We have Greek native speakers speaking about Greek. So they're not necessarily able to get the sophistication of certain things, but they do talk about each other's languages, which is really cool. So when Romans talk about Greek, they say, oh, Greek does this, Latin does this. They talk about, that's one of the reasons we know that the pronunciation of omicron ypsilon in modern Greek, which is u, obviously, like Lukas, one of the versions of my name in Greek, right? Lukas. Well, they know it was u even back in ancient Roman times, because the Romans say that Greeks are incapable of making an u sound with their letters unless they combine it with omicron. They have omicron ypsilon, then they get u. So which is, now we know that pronunciation of that sound goes that far back. And using the modern languages as a starting point and de-evolving them systematically is another way to do that. So that's one way, through the actual grammarians. Another way is through accidental things, where you have elements where they're maybe certainly in a play or something that's meant to be spoken. We can see how the authors are trying to evoke sound in some way. For example, in Plautus, one of my favorite Roman playwrights, he's a comedian. Roman comedy was typified by alliteration. So if you have a lot of ga ga ga, like ga ga ga, ba ba ba, like word after word in a sentence, it sounds funny to the Roman ear, apparently, and it does too. And that's one of the ways where we see, like, ka next to ke instead of ka next to che. We can infer from that as well that, oh, well, they're making this is clearly alliteration with ke and not with che. Like, say, I don't know, like capit ke nam instead of capit che nam, which would be the modern Italian pronunciation of Latin. And so we take that, and then inscriptions like graffiti that's on walls, misspellings in letters, things that are misspelled usually indicate some kind of merger has occurred between two sounds. And music, we actually have sheet music preserved from ancient times, which is really cool. Yeah, that's really cool. Like the ancient Greek stuff. It's amazing. It's really, really fascinating. And going back to and what else? And then just linguistic processes. So you can compare and understand something like, for example, I can't think of any good Polish or Russian words off the top of my head, but Russian has a beautiful and distinct ol sound. that la, the wonderful la sound. And
Mm.
in Polish, it's not really there. It is, though, there with the L with the line through it, which is wa, like like Latinsky. Actually, I think the word Latinsky, so Latin, is
Yeah.
Łaciński in Polish.
Okay.
So,
Mm.
and I'm sorry to my Polish friends because I don't speak Polish very well, and they keep telling me I need to, and they're right. But that's an example where the la, that la becomes a wa. And how does that happen? Well, the la is highly velarized, and wa is a back vowel, which is, so they're phonologically connected. So we can infer there is a version of a language which Polish and Russian both came from, where there was a la, and that Polish also, in its older form, had a la before it became wa, before it became smoothed out, shall we say, in that change. So there's all kinds of processes that occur, and then you can look specifically at Latin for older Romance languages like Sardinian. In Sardinian, there is no che or je in the Senorese dialect of Sardinian. So they'll still say, for like Italian cento, Latin centum. In Sardinian, it's centu. It's almost exactly like the Latin. So that goes a long way to show it. So that's how we can figure it out. And how perfect will we be? Not perfect. There's a lot of variety in modern languages, though, as you know, and I don't know anything about the vulgarity and the variety in Bulgarian, excuse me, or about and very little about the variety in French. So I've heard a little bit of some of the accents in France, and but of course they're various for modern speakers, and in ancient speakers too, we can see evidence of there's more than one pronunciation regionally. And when you were trying to, because there's not like there's millions of people speaking these languages, there are quite a few. There's tens of thousands of us, but it's not enough where you'd want to say, oh, I'm going to speak like an Egyptian and I'm going to speak like a Spaniard. You want to have something that's a little bit more consistent. So we can be pretty tolerant when it comes to saying, is this the right model? Is this the right model? So much of it becomes a matter of stylistic art. Like, do you like we were mentioning a little bit before, I like to imitate certain aspects of Italian phonology and intonation in my Latin in order to, because I know Italian, and Italian has a lot of things that are in common with Latin, and I'd rather sound like an Italian than an American, frankly, when I speak Latin. But I think sounding like a Spaniard or sounding like a Catalan also works really well for Latin, or Sardinian, for example. Anyway, go ahead.
Very interesting.
So in relation to these modern Romance languages like Italian, Spanish, French, I think many people that have them as a native language would emphasize how close they are to Latin. So I'm sure there is no straightforward answer, but is there a way to say which one of them is closest to Latin, even in different aspects like pronunciation or grammar, vocabulary?
Absolutely, and it's interesting. I've especially after having had the opportunity to be on the Norbert's Ecolinguist channel, and to see so many responses from native speakers of Portuguese and Spanish and Italian and Romanian and French as well. How each person would generally claim that their language was the closest, and that's sort of a sampling error bias in statistics, where you can see your own language. And Alex, of course, as a French speaker, you can see that, hey, I have all this vocabulary, and look, I even as a French speaker have final T like Latin in like what's a good example? Think of one that I can't think of any. At least like chanter or something, where there's ends with a T. Chanter, he was singing, il chantait. And there's cantabat ends in a T in Latin. So my language is the close. So then it's not unreasonable to do that, to see that the conservative spelling system of French is clearly has a strong affinity with Latin, where you don't see that in other Romance languages, except for say Sardinian, where they still have cantat for he sings, just like Latin cantat. So which language is really the closest? As just as you said, Iglika, it has to be sort of case by case. Phonetically, at least, let's say phonetically and phonemically, for the most part, Sardinian tends to be the closest to, well, and what is Latin? If we're trying to, isolate to a specific time period of Latin, most of us mean that classical Latin from 100 BC to 200 AD. And for that reason, Sardinian, which was colonized from the 3rd to 1st centuries BC, seems to have the best examples of preservation. Where in Sardinian, there are words like gentu instead of cento or centu or cien, as there are in other Romance languages. So it's just, okay, so we can see an older form of it there. So Sardinian definitely has a lot of things. And Sardinian, of course, is closely related to the languages of Italy. As you probably know, there's hundreds of languages in Italy. Standard Italian is just one beautiful variety of it. One of my favorites for sure, but there's, Neapolitan, and there's Sicilian, Venetian, and the government of Italy generally just considers those dialects. When I made a video about that, talking about how it's mostly a political thing to try to encourage one standardized form of the language, Standard Italian, and to some degree to repress and not to teach the vernacular forms of the language. But so whatever you call them, dialects or language, is a matter of preference. But they all are evolved from Latin, and so they all have characteristics which are really similar. Some are more, some are less. And then outside of Italy, of course, phonetically, Spanish has a lot of things that are super in common with Latin. And European Spanish in particular has a fantastic trait, which is the retracted S sound, which you hear in languages like Dutch and Finnish, modern Greek, where they say s instead of s. And that's a difference of pitch, and it's the placement of the tongue. So say French, and I don't remember, do you have a sh sound in Bulgarian?
Yeah.
Okay, so as if you have a sh sound, yeah. And I had I learned a teensy bit of Bulgarian years ago, and I don't remember it being anything other than pretty much like the normal Slavic or even English or French s sound, which is generally the same in most of those languages. Though in Serbo-Croatian, it's super high pitch. It's like really high. I love it. It's like it's great. Have you noticed that?
We traveled there a couple of times. So it's quite specific. Yeah, true. We didn't really.
It's a weird thing to notice, but I definitely have noticed it. But languages that don't have a sh in them, like English or French or Italian, and I was Japanese, they all have a sh of some kind. And because of that sh, where the tongue is somewhat retracted, we usually push the s forward, and where the tip of the tongue is behind the lower teeth. But in modern Greek, Finnish, it's retracted, and the tongue placement is a bit higher in the mouth. So instead of it being s, it's sh. And it does that because there's no sh, which would cause confusion. So it's allowed, the tongue is allowed, and preferably stays in that position. That so like I don't know what's a good name. Aftos, for example, modern Greek. Aftos, that sh, instead of with an American more American sounding s, aftos. And that's which is more typical of French and possibly also Bulgarian. So European Spanish has that, which is really cool. And Latin also doesn't have a sh. Again, I mean the ancient classical form of Latin doesn't have a sh sound, and therefore we would expect that s sound to be retracted. And Sardinian does that too, doesn't it? Sardinian has that. European Spanish has that. So, at different aspects. When it comes to verb conjugations, Italian kind of preserves the leggere or Italian legere, or instead of like Spanish will just normalize them with the ere verbs, like leer or something. I'm trying to think of other examples. And where again, hey, French has got another one, because French, I believe, French does have a preserved version of all 4 of the infinitive forms and of the verbs. They sound a bit different, but they're still kind of there. So you can find all kinds of places. Italian definitely in some ways seems like you could say the vocabulary is more similar, but then you have Italian has guardare, Spanish has mirar. Mirar is from Latin. Guardare is from Germanic word after the end of the Roman Empire. So it's really it ends up becoming Iron Man could beat up Batman in a fight kind of thing. it's like yes, but
Mm,
it becomes a bit
mm.
just for
But,
fun. Mhm.
but actually, Glika's question is very interesting because it's not linked to linguistics at all. But
Hmm.
let's say that French people really we sort of let's say in the way we envision history, which is not necessarily true as a matter of fact, but we really see ourselves as the Gauls, and the Gauls were fighting the Romans. So we don't have that much in common with them. Like we're really quite specific. Like, yeah, indeed, we got some Latin, but we were the Gauls, so we're not that close. And it's quite
Mhm.
interesting to listen to you and say that, well, actually, no, we do have a lot of like Latin within French. So it's very interesting to listen to someone who really knows a lot
Yes.
about this.
I'm
And
trying to think, when
mm,
was the statue of Vercingetorix erected in France?
oh, well, that will look like a safe person. I have no idea.
Oh yeah, because
Yeah,
there's I know there's a statue of Vercingetorix somewhere in France,
yeah,
and
there
as there
definitely is. Yeah.
and there's a statue also of Arminius in Germany somewhere too, and they
Mm,
were thought of these heroic, defiant anti-Roman
yeah,
individuals, and therefore they stood for the growing nationalism in these two different European countries, for example. So I'm trying to think when would have been probably. I mean, Napoleon is of course the fantastic example of the beginning of, I think, modern French
yeah.
um, nationalism as ideal. And I don't mean that. A lot of people throw on the word nationalism in a very negative light, and I don't mean to do that. I mean that as a purely
No,
observation,
yeah.
a
It's
united identity to say, hey,
mm,
we're French, and we're
yeah.
whatever. The
Mm,
nationalism, for example, in Italy in the mid 1800s led to the unification of Italy, and people usually don't think of that as something negative either necessarily. But
mm,
so then the praising of these of an ideal, yeah, like Vercingetorix, he was the one who like,
yeah.
oh, there's a great painting too. Did the painting? It's of Vercingetorix in front of Caesar, and
Yeah.
he's on a horse and he's surrendering,
Mm.
and I'm
But
pretty sure it was.
it's looking very, very
Yes.
glorious. And,
He's looking very exactly. Even though, and Caesar's
mm.
there, he looks like Marlon Brando. Actually, I think
Yeah.
it's like very very Italian looking, and
Yeah.
he's not, Caesar's not depicted badly, but Vercingetorix looks like a true magnificent hero on that white horse, and
Yeah.
which is of course probably not how he was actually
Mm.
taken in front of Caesar, which was more likely in chains and
Yeah.
all the
And actually, Vercingetorix, I'm sorry, but he indeed fought with Caesar, if I'm not mistaken. He fought
oh,
in the
absolutely.
Roman army, so
Battle of
it's more
Alesia, if I'm not
complex than
mistaken. Yeah, that's where
yeah.
he was finally captured and defeated.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And so
Mm.
which is it's so interesting too. And French is fascinating because it's such a great example of how you would expect the language to change more
Yeah.
sometimes. For
Mm.
example, people, and I did a live stream actually with my friend and colleague Rafael Torrigiano about a book that was written to say that Spanish is not descended from Latin. I don't know if you saw that one.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
we talked for 5 hours, and we basically tear apart the book
Yeah, you
because
Yeah.
did.
it's linguistic. To say it kindly, it's linguistic trash. That is to say,
Ah.
it's completely uses a lot of things that are wrong. And a lot of
Mm.
misconceptions come from the idea that how can it be where, because we have a lot of great genetic evidence now, and we know
Mm.
that inhabitants of, say, France or Spain or Romania are not
Mm.
mostly genetically Italian, not mostly at all. There's, I think,
Mm.
5 to 10%, maybe a little bit more.
Mm.
But so therefore, people put a lot of value on that genetic heritage when it comes to other aspects like culture or language, and I think that's a shame, and that is sort of
Mm.
recurring now, and it's definitely a shame because that's the kind of eugenics nonsense which started in the 1800s, which led to
Yeah.
Nazism and fascism, of like saying, oh,
Mm.
this the reason that the idea, for example, that the Nazis had that only people of an Aryan stock were capable of
Yeah.
developing advanced civilizations, like
Mm.
say British or German civilization. And they're like, oh, okay, Italian, because they obviously had to deal with them. It's all nonsense, but they come to this
Mm.
conclusion with a really limited
Yeah.
sampling, of course.
And it actually hurts the culture itself. That's ultimately, which is ironic. Yeah.
Terribly so. And with the idea that, okay, well, we can see that there's so little Italian DNA in the speakers of other languages outside of Italy. How could it possibly be that the languages are descended from Latin? Because people think that they're really connected. They're not, though. What happens, because it's not like the Romans depopulated Gaul or Spain or Dacia before it became Romania, and then populated with themselves. That is one way to spread a language, but that's not at all necessary. What happens is with the long-standing prestige that a language can have, such as and the international prestige of French is a great example, because we see how many people learn French and because it's so useful. And has been, and of course English and Spanish are in this century are yet more ample examples of that. If you can speak one of those languages, including still French to this day, I would say, but certainly English and Spanish, you have this ability to do things, because you can work in English or Spanish or both, and you can work anywhere in the two American continents and pretty much all around the world, since they're both international languages. And if you know Portuguese, all the better, because then you can get Brazil, you can get some African countries, and French for the countries that are in Africa, and Canada, of course, places where they speak French. And so you just learn a few prestige languages and you're set. Now, if there's only one prestige language, which is Latin, and then Greek if you go far enough east in the ancient Roman times, then you have the language. So it's just this, it's for good or bad, that Roman Empire civilization was such a powerful force, not even necessarily trying to be. They would just have like it's like coming to a place and they don't have iPhones or computers or internet. It's like, oh, we're doing, do you want to be a part of this? And they're like, yeah. And of course they learned the skills necessary to be part of that really cool stuff, like plumbing and streets and advanced agricultural practices and all kinds of things, and languages just transmitted with that. And that's why the amazing and strange situations where the Celtic languages, except for Brittany, I'm just kind of think of the English name for the language. It's a Brythonic language, but it's not Brythonic. Breton, right?
Breton. In Brittany, Breton. That's it.
Right. The only, if I'm not mistaken, the only Celtic language that survived in France.
Yeah.
Whereas everything else is standard French or related to French, like Occitan. Related from Latin. Yeah. And well, how can that be? How can they all have just given it up? And that's because as fascinating as ancient Gaulish civilization was, it wasn't as advanced as we say. It wasn't as well developed and expansive. It didn't have all these technological things associated with it. And thus everybody just learned Latin and they forgot the Celtic languages. And then even when the Franks come in from Franconia, from Germany, and they come in and they take over, then the new prestige language is the Frankish, Old Frankish or Middle Frankish. And then, but that one only has a moderate effect on the language that had already been built up there. It's fascinating how those things occur. So anyway, I'll pause there. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Super interested. Super interesting.
So do you have any more questions about Latin? Because I want to ask something about ancient Greek.
Well, I think you pretty much answered my my question, because you mentioned I was thinking about the extra influence of Latin on, not necessarily like when you think of Latin, you wouldn't, for example, think of German or Russian, like with for example, the cases. And I'm thinking you pretty much answered answered what I thought. Like it's just like all the Indo-European languages, they do share similarities.
Many of them do. And I came from that perspective, as many Western European language speakers do, which is so interesting. When you look at the research, especially about the phonology of languages, usually have these people comparing Latin or ancient Greek with English, French, German, Italian maybe, and maybe Spanish. Usually they don't talk ever about Portuguese or Romanian, because a lot of academics never bother to learn them. And they certainly don't talk about any Slavic languages. we're still an Indo-European. They don't compare them with Japanese. They don't compare them with Arabic or other languages which are might, in fact, do have lots of things in common with Latin and ancient Greek.
Like North
because
Africa was definitely Roman territory at some point. So
oh yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Oh, and I just mean from the perspective of looking at what different languages do, like in like Arabic, for example, has phonemic vowel length in classical Arabic. So the difference between and is not just where we don't have that in English or Bulgarian or French, but we do have it in, say, Croatian and Serbo-Croatian and Czech and not a lot of other languages. So when the a lot of these scholars, a lot of them are German, a lot of them are Englishmen, and they end up over like the past few hundred years, right? There's a lot of Germans and Englishmen who are writing about these things, and they come from this idea that the whole linguistic world is just French and German and English. And so when they approach them, they're like, wow, could it be that way? And so they often make some strange comparisons. And from our perspective, my perspective too, that's how I grew up, knowing, thinking that was a whole lot, and it is, but it's also very little when it comes to the vast, beautiful variety of the world's languages. And so when we encounter obviously something like the case system in Latin, I learned German first in school. So when I was like, oh, great, it has cases like German, I was excited because this was like, I made that connection too. And it's, of course, right to make that connection. They are really similar, and they do a lot of similar things. The case system between Latin and ancient Greek, and then that I came to find out, oh yay, look at all the Slavic languages except Bulgarian that have a case system, and this is great. And I was so excited, and it's so yeah.
Let's dig out.
Yeah. So, and I can only imagine how. Actually, I would love to ask you that a little bit later, Iglika, how it's been to look at other Slavic languages, all of which seem to have that case system, and if you feel like that has been a challenge, depending on if you really studied them.
Yes, definitely. But it's a challenge that I like because I'm really interested in grammar, and I find it easy to find the logic of grammar. I'm like also a software programmer because I think this is kind of the easy part for me, and the vocabulary is the problem. So, for example, trying to learn Russian, for me, it feels easy because the grammar, like I'm genuinely enjoying finding out its specific logic, like the cases, and the vocabulary. Just there is a lot in common just for me to. Even if it's not the same words, I can memorize them because of some root, something that makes me think of something else. So yeah, but that is challenging. I think it's a very common thing for Bulgarian speakers of Russian or other Slavic languages to get this wrong. Like, for example, Russians speaking Bulgarian, they would get the definite articles wrong because they don't have them. So they would just skip them. Yeah. So we have many people, Russian people, who have been living in Bulgaria for many years, and they still do that. So it's like a little joke we have between us. We struggle with the case system. They struggle with the definite article.
Absolutely. And I know you want to talk about Greek. After that, I'd love to talk about the Balkan Sprachbund and how awesome it is, and those traits that Bulgarian has in common with other languages in the Balkans. But go ahead. You want to ask about Greek?
About ancient Greek. So to what extent is it mutually intelligible with modern Greek? And are there any other languages that one can perceive in ancient Greek?
Wonderful question. Hold on. Let me have to get ready for this one. If you thought I was talking a lot before, it's because it's not easily answered. It is answerable, but it's not easily summarized or quickly. And the reason is because, like I was mentioning before, I did a little video on what's a dialect and what's a language, how a lot of it is connected with personal identity and national identity. And it's, I think, helpful to see the comparison of like why the Romance languages aren't Latin. None of us would go ahead and say that the speakers of, say, the five national Romance languages, being Portuguese, Spanish, French, Italian, and Romanian, and all the other languages related to them, none of us believe that they are Latin. don't say that because they're not called Latin. We do, of course, often refer to Latin people. There was even, I found out this recently, there was what was it called? A Latin sphere of that was an organization which was around for about a decade or two. It ended in about 15 years ago, where all the speakers of Romance languages would have, I don't know, they would meet at conferences or something, and they were trying to kind of develop a common. It was not quite like a military union like NATO or or like, say, NAFTA, the North American Free Trade agreement, where you have it was something like much milder than that, or a little bit like, say, the British Commonwealth, which doesn't really, to my knowledge, doesn't really confer many benefits except that you can kind of travel between the countries. So something like even milder than that, which is cool. But no, except for referring to these languages as being Latin languages or Neo-Latin languages, we don't really think of them as being the same as Latin, especially if we study it in school. We're like, hey, and we're French speakers, we're Italian speakers, and we're Spanish speakers, and we study Latin. We say, oh, this isn't the same. We can see there's a lot of similarities, but it's not the same. And why did that happen? That's because it's interesting that as completely evident, as utterly self-evident as that appears, it's mostly programmed into us. For example, if you, have you ever seen any of Chaucer, Middle English?
Yeah.
It's extremely difficult for native speakers to understand. It's not like you can pick out words and you can see a lot of similarities. But especially if you pronounce it with the 1300s pronunciation, it's not intelligible unless you're trained in it. It becomes essentially a foreign language exercise. And you go back to something much older, like Old English, and it's even more like, what is this? What?
Beowulf.
And it's great. It's super interesting. But it's even though we call them Old English or Middle English, we don't feel like they're really the same language. We also don't study them hardly ever. We look at them in like maybe for a day in middle school and English class, and then we don't really touch them unless we have a special interest in them. So I bring that up because what happened essentially with Latin and the Romance languages is that there was only one way to write Latin for 1,000 years, and that was the way that was written that classical Latin period. And every author thereafter was imitating that form. And the pronunciation was changing for letters and sounds and vowels. Final T was falling away, but they were still writing it just like French still will do. And even Old French still had it. It was still pronounced in Old French, as I recall, which is pretty cool. Which is why, of course, you have liaison. You do actually still pronounce it. It's not gone.
We do.
Yeah, which is so cool. Isn't that weird? Isn't that cool that you have a linguistic memory of a sound that technically disappeared but didn't? Italian does something weird like that too, called raddoppiamento sintatico, which is super weird. Like, how do you do that? Anyway, it's really neat. But by retaining liaison and having it. But anyway, like, why would that happen? Why would it happen then? So there's only one standard way to write Latin, even though that people are pronouncing it differently. By the time that the Frankish king Charlemagne is in charge of most of Germany and France, and even into, I think, parts of Spain, some of his dominion went, if I recall. Suddenly, there's a situation where he has this vast empire, which has been named the Roman Empire. We call it Holy Roman Empire historically, but that was the Roman Empire reborn. That was the point of it. And now, okay, over the Roman Empire, we speak Latin, but everybody that is coming to meet in Aachen, and that's where his capital was, right? In Aachen, I think it was. I know his head is there. I've seen his head in the Cathedral of Aachen.
I think
his head
so,
is inside a gold case.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I
well,
remember
wherever
the
it was,
gold
I don't
case.
recall.
I'm not quite sure where, but
yeah, well, wherever the seat of his empire was, people were coming all over the empire and trying to communicate the common educated language. There's only one, and that's Latin. But people are having a hard time communicating because they're all using different pronunciations. So he, realizing this problem, takes a highly educated person from the most conservative version of Latin that was used, which was from England, of all places, and a guy called Alcuin He was Englishman, and they spoke Old English back then, but he also, of course, knew and taught Latin. And he was hired to standardize the pronunciation of Latin. That's where ecclesiastical Latin pronunciation comes from. Because at that point, you would take a Latin text, whether it's the Bible or a legal whatever, and if you were from the what we call, of course, France today, then you would pronounce it like Old French. It would phonetically. You wouldn't pronounce the letters like they're written at all. And if you were from Spain, it would be like Spanish. If from Italy, it would be like Italian. And none of those pronunciations of that time period, which is the year 800 AD, are like ecclesiastical or classical Latin. They're super different. They would sound like the Romance languages, essentially, with some small changes that hadn't occurred yet. So that was where the first split happened, where suddenly the new way, the standard way to pronounce Latin, was a highly conservative, reconstructed ancient form, essentially, not completely, perfect, but ecclesiastical Latin pronunciation is actually almost the same as classical Latin, especially when compared with, say, French, Italian, Spanish, etc. The next big one came with figures like Dante, who created a literary language which wasn't Latin, and the point of its existence was to not be Latin. And that's how that went also with other Romance languages. And you asked about Greece, so that was my first context. So thank you for your patience with that, Iglika.
That's
What about Greek?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what about Greek? So the split between the split that comes with identity, and also pronunciation, which is another part of it, between the ancient and modern languages essentially never has occurred in Greece, to such a point where, have you ever read any Katharevousa, Iglika?
No.
Yeah, that would be the, so there's Dimotiki, which is thought of as modern Greek. And the difference is essentially Dimotiki is a descendant of the normal spoken language, and Katharevousa is just ancient Greek, which has been just a little bit adapted to more modern ways of using grammar and syntax. But for the most part, Katharevousa is very much ancient Greek, and Dimotiki is pretty much the natural evolution of the language. And modern Greek today, 21st century standard modern Greek, is mostly Dimotiki with some amount of Katharevousa mixed in. And I talk about this because Katharevousa was the only accepted normal formal way to write anything until a few decades ago. That is ancient Greek, with all those weird little accents and things that they weren't pronouncing. They were still writing them until really recently. And it's so weird. It's so weird from especially perspective when we see how the Romance languages hundreds of years ago, almost 1,000 years ago in some places, like 700 years ago for Italian, for example, changed their spellings and freely changed their grammatical systems to be the way that people were speaking, for the most part, though not entirely. And because if, say, all of our Western European Romance languages, all were sort of evolving together as they were doing that, and they all still had Latin as the common language, so they were still borrowing lots of vocabulary. They were deliberately changing things. For example, Spanish, so Latin altus means high, and Spanish it's alto, but it wasn't in Old Spanish. It was otto, just like that transition, that la sound that that's in a lot of Slavic languages, and in Polish became wa. Something happened also in Iberian Romance, that is in Spanish and Portuguese, where, for example, the Brazilian word for cool is legal, but it's spelled like English legal. So they that it becomes legal. It's a oo sound at the end, very much like Polish. And the word alto, which is how it is in Italian, alto, must have been pronounced alto, until it finally becomes otto in Old Spanish. But because of the influence of Latin, they re-Latinized a super common word. People say alto all the time in Spanish. It means high, just like it does in other Romance languages. So you have this constant influence of this, it's called cultisms, linguistic cultisms, to
Mm.
use a deliberately cultivated vocabulary and pronunciation, such as it's understood by people, to alter the way that people are using the language to make it more old-fashioned.
Mm.
And then that just becomes normal in some cases. Um, and so what happened with Greece was that times 10. This constant that because, like, why on earth would they be writing in the same, mostly the same kind of Greek as was used in 500 BC in the 20th century? Why would they do that? It's not just a sudden decision. That was a consistent trend all the way from ancient Roman times through the present, of trying to use these older forms to revere these ancient authors and to keep the language like in an older way, because language will evolve naturally.
Yeah.
But that can also be affected by how people choose to use the language and encourage other people to use the language, whether through prescription in schools or through what's popular. And because of that, almost like, because you can take some Annika, I can't remember her name, of her last name, Comini. I'm trying to remember how to pronounce her name. She wrote these histories of one of her father, one of the emperors of the Eastern Roman Empire. And that Greek is basically the same as Attic or biblical ancient Greek. It's very legible to someone who knows ancient Greek. It's very easy to read, relatively speaking. It's not at all like modern, even though we know that a lot of the modern Greek being spoken was more like modern Greek today. So we have this constant influence, this constant repression of various changes, which are natural. And those kinds of like repression, like auto becoming auto again in Spanish, which is super weird. Those are happening in any language. We have them in English, like the sound of H, like hat or how, was gone in most spoken English a few hundred years ago, but it was restored in most words, except for honor. And American English, we say herb, but British says herb. So
I'm really struggling with these,
In
actually.
British English, it's even okay to say "an" before a word starting with an H. Like, even if it's pronounced, I always found this weird. Like, "an history."
Yeah, and that's
for example,
because,
in French, you do not pronounce the H at all. Like,
of course.
yeah.
Oh, of course, yeah. Oh, and
Yeah.
it's interesting. Yeah, so just as
Yeah.
French speakers learning English, at first they don't pronounce the H. Really, they're just using 1600s English in a way.
There you go.
At least of the London type. Not all
Yeah.
English, but
So you shouldn't correct me.
yeah. So yeah, exactly. And your question, Iglik, was a great one. To what degree is modern Greek intelligible with the ancient language? And so much of it is familiarity. If you look at the system of, like, just the basic way that the grammar works, it's easy to show someone who studied a lot of modern Greek and then show them ancient Greek. They're not going to understand very much at all.
Yeah.
But if you give it to a Greek person, they might. What's the disconnect? What's the difference? The difference is that while a student of modern Greek wants to be able to speak Greek with people, maybe read some modern Greek literature, modern Greeks are constantly exposed to ancient Greek, like especially if they go to church or if they read any of the Bible. They almost never translate it into or modern Greek version. They just use the old one. And because they are constantly are told and tell themselves that this is the same language, just an older version, that psychological say, hey, this is the same language as mine, because that's what we're exposed to when we read as native speakers Shakespeare. Like, hey, this is the best English author ever. We're like, oh, okay, this is my language. Shall and thou and okay, so we get used to it and we accept it as an older form of the language, whereas if we were taught that Shakespearean English was its own language, that with a different name, not English, then we would, I think, psychologically react to it very differently, and we wouldn't use Shakespearean phrases like we still do in modern English. And just like that, modern Greek will use so many like stock phrases, even using grammatical things that aren't part of modern Greek grammar, because they're just pulled wholesale into the modern language, even more than Latin expressions are used in Romance. So what that does is it gives the modern Greek, because the name is the same, it's always called Greek instead of a different name.
Hmm.
And national identity, one of the reasons that Greeks are independent is because they had to believe that they were just the best, and they fought against the Turks, and they won their freedom. And if they didn't have that strong identity, they wouldn't have succeeded. And that's contributed, I think, really profoundly to their sense, at least when it comes to the language, that that ancient Greek, oh, that's my language. It's not your language. You're a barbarian. How dare you say anything that you're not? So it's a complicated, very complicated issue. But when Greeks are given, even if they studied a bit of ancient Greek in school, if Greeks are given actual unadapted texts, especially if they're an ancient, Attic, 5th century BC, and even some passages of the Bible, they'll have great difficulty understanding them, even if they've studied it to a degree, which is, from our perspective, if we've studied some Latin in school, if we speak French or Italian or Spanish, we'll recognize, oh, that's the exact same thing that we go through. Greeks will think, no, they're not different languages. So it's a, there you go. That's my answer.
Yeah. Well, I see. So it's a very different, not different, but it's a very specific process that the Greek language went through.
It's cool.
Like, we're deviating a bit from our path, but could you actually enlighten us with, because I've noticed basically that in some areas in Bulgaria, mainly near the Black Sea, you have some basically old Greek.
Oh yes, we do. But people there still speak Greek. Also, we have many like names of towns and villages that have a Greek name apart from their common name.
Yeah. You have Varna. Varna is the second biggest city in Bulgaria. Is it?
It's kind of fluctuating.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. And basically Varna was before Odessos.
Right.
So it's kind of, and I'm really curious, like, where does that come from? Like the
long ago. Yeah, really long ago.
So if you're really into like classic languages, Bulgaria is very interesting on that
Oh, I'd
note.
love to visit.
Yeah, you can see the Turkic influence, definitely, but from time to time you pick up some Greek, and Sophia, wisdom.
Yes.
Yeah. It's obvious. I don't even pay attention to it, but yeah, Sophia.
Yeah.
All part of the Eastern Roman Empire.
Yeah. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. So thank you so much for this kind of framework, and now a bit more practical. Let's do some reading. Yes.
Okay.
Let's start with the Latin. We have selected a text that's by Shakespeare, Julius Caesar. And as I was just Googling, the first thing that popped up was actually Luke's video. So I'll put a link in the description box. And what we are going to deal with is the part of it that's right next, starting with Act 1, Scene 2. So,
all right.
I guess we'll make fools of ourselves. We'll read the modern Latin languages, and then maybe first Luke can read the Latin.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, whatever you like. And of course, this is what's so great about this is this was naturally the play Julius Caesar is written in English by Shakespeare, but was translated about 150 years ago, I think, into really good classical Latin, which is amazing. It's not in whereas of course Shakespeare is in verse. It's the Latin is just in prose. But it's really good prose. So yeah, let's see what we have the French version, and cool. And I see Italian, nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right, yeah, sure. So so not the English one. You want the Latin one?
Well,
the Latin.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah. No problem.
Absolutely. All right. So, scena secunda sintu Romae, platea quaeda, in some piazza, some plaza, some forum. And so, Caesar, Calpurnia, This is Casca, right? Yes, Casca. Tacendum Caesar loquitur. Ad sum Caesar. Antonio curso agenti te obviabeto. Antoni, quid Caesar domine? Ne negligas Antoni cursus studio. Calpurniam tangere. Fertur anima antiquis mulieres hoc sacro currentium tactus sterilitatis vinculis exolui posse. Non negligam, cum Caesar fiat dixerit, factus. Ordinentur iam ludi, et nequis absit ritus. How far would you like to go?
Maybe till the end of the Latin. It's just the end of the,
I see.
the
Yeah, there you
scene.
go. Continuing then. And Caesars, quis me vocat? Taceant omnes, taceant inquam. Quis ex turba me appellat, voc audio exuperantem tubas, quae Caesarem clamat, digitrum Caesar dat taurem. Idus caveto martios, quis ne ille est? Aruspex, quite caver idus martios jubet? Quod adducide ut intuear. Heus tu, et urba veni, in Caesarem converte oculos. Iam quidais revedas velim. Idus caveto martios, somniat iste, eamus. Yes, beware the Ides of March.
Yeah, the 8th of March. It was a celebration, wasn't it? In March. It's like,
Well,
yeah.
it's actually still part of the calendar. It's the 15th of March. They just called it the Ides, which is in the lunar calendar. Romans used a lunar calendar until Caesar, who adopted the Egyptian solar calendar for the Julian calendar, Julius Caesar, that we still essentially use today. And the Ides was the full moon.
Yeah.
And the first day of the month was the new moon, when you couldn't see it. It was black. And so so the full moon, watch out for the full moon. It's werewolf stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
So
Okay, I'll leave the
what's the
French
plan
to
now?
you, but I'll read the Italian before that.
Go ahead.
Okay, it's easy on you.
Yeah.
Roma, una piazza. Fanfara, entrano il corteo. Cesare Antonio, questi in arnese pronto per la corsa. Calpurnia, Porcia, Decio, Cicerone, Brutto, Cassio e Casca. Dietro una gran folla, in mezzo alla quale un indovino. Calpurnia, olà, silenzio, parla Cesare. Calpurnia, eccomi, son qui, signore. Appena Antonio inizierà la corsa, cerca di metterti sul suo percorso. Antonio, Cesare, signore mio, non ti scordare durante la corsa di toccare Calpurnia con la mano, che secondo che dicono gli anziani, le donne sterili che sono toccate in questa corsa sacra si scrollano di dosso il maleficio dell'infecondità. Lo torrò a mente. Cesare deve solo dir fa questo ed è fatto. Va bene, proseguiamo. Non si trascuri alcuna cerimonia. Cesare, chi mi chiama tra la folla? Silenzio, olà, si spenga ogni rumore. Chi m'ha chiamato per nome là in mezzo? Ho sentito una voce più squillante di tutti questi suoni che m'ha gridato: Cesare, che parli? Cesare è qui che ascolta. Temi glidi di marzo. Chi è quell'uomo? Un indovino. Cesare, ti dice di temer lidi di marzo. Che venga qui, voglio vederlo in faccia. Amico, vieni fuori dalla folla e presentati a Cesare. Che mi stavi dicendo? Vuoi ripeterlo? Temi lidi di marzo. È un visionario. Si lasci andare e si prosegua. Avanti.
Bravissima. That's fantastic.
Grazie.
Yeah, brava. Wonderful. That's so great. I've never heard it in Italian before. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see the French, shall we?
Ah,
Yeah.
oui.
So I don't know if I'll do well, like, but
It's your language.
no, the truth of the matter is I'm very, like, I don't do poetic reading well, so. Toujours à Rome, une place publique. Entre en procession avec la musique César, Antoine, préparé pour la course, Calphurnia, Portia, Decius, Cicéron, Brutus, Cassius, Casca. Ils sont suivis d'une grande multitude dans laquelle se trouve un devin. Calphurnia. Hola, silence, César parle. Calphurnia. Me voici, monseigneur. Ayez soin de vous tenir sur le passage d'Antoine quand il courra. Antoine, César, monseigneur. N'oubliez pas en courant, Antoine, de toucher Calphurnia, car nos anciens disent que les femmes infécondes, en se faisant toucher dans cette sainte course, secouent la malédiction qui les rendrait stériles. Je m'en souviendrai. Quand César dit « faites cela », cela est fait. Partez et ne mettez aucune cérémonie. César. Ah, qui m'appelle. Commandez que tout bruit cesse. Encore une fois, silence. César, qui est-ce dans la foule qui m'appelle ainsi? J'entends une voix, plus perçante que tous les instruments de musique criés. César, parle. César se tourne pour entendre. Prends garde aux ides de Mars. Quel est cet homme? Un devin qui vous avertit de prendre garde aux ides de Mars. Amenez-le devant moi que je vois son visage. Mon ami, sors de la foule. Regarde César. Qu'as-tu à me dire maintenant? Répète encore. Prends garde aux ides de Mars. C'est un visionnaire. Laissons-le. Passons. Yeah.
Ah, wonderful. Yeah.
Thanks. Did my best.
Oh, French sounds so good. I love French. Yeah.
Thank you. Well,
wonderful.
Yeah.
That's so great. Of course, such a famous work is obviously translated into different languages, but I've never heard Italian or French version of Julius Caesar. So sounds great.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
See the Spanish finally.
Yeah.
Roma, una plaza pública. Entran, procesión con música. César, Antonio, ataviado para las carreras. Calpurnia, Porcia, Decio, Cicerón, Bruto, Casio y Casca. Gran muchedumbre los sigue. Entre ellos un adivino. Calpurnia, callan todos. César habla, cesa la música. Calpurnia, ¿qué señor? Cuando corriere Antonio, ponte en su camino. Antonio. César, señor. Antonio, no te olvides de tocar a Calpurnia cuando corras. Los viejos dicen que mujer estéril que se tocare en tan sagrado curso será fecunda. Lo tendré presente. Si dices, César, eso harás, se hace. Seguid, no falte ceremonia alguna. César, ¿quién llama? Que se callen todos. Silencio ya. Quiere ser que me llama, más fuerte que la música. Vibrante, humana voz, oigo gritarme, César, habla, que César se dispone a oírte. De los idos de marzo desconfía. ¿Quién es? Un adivino que guardarte de los idos de marzo te aconseja. Tráiganlo aquí, le quiero ver el rostro. Sal tú de entre la turba, mira a César. Ahora, ¿qué dices? Habla nuevamente. De los idos de marzo desconfía. Un soñador. Dejémosle adelante.
Great. And great Spanish too. Wow. That's so cool. Wonderful. You'll have to tell me more about how you picked up all your languages. If we get to talk about that today. Well.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
The English, I count it as native-like. I mean, I'm sure I don't sound native-like, but I started early, and I went to an international school as well, like my high school. So the more complicated, like technical things, come more naturally in English to me than in Bulgarian.
Mm.
Well, everyday conversation definitely in Bulgarian. Then French with
that's
him,
cool.
of course. But before that, I had studied Spanish and Italian for a couple of years. And then after getting my French like to a high level, I went back to Spanish and Italian. And now I've been studying Japanese for a couple of years.
おー、いいなすごいよ。大好きだ、日本語。
Arigato.
いいね。
Hopefully this autumn I have been granted a scholarship, the MEX scholarship, to do research in Japan. So
ど
if
こ
everything is fine, I'll do that.
どこで
Kyoto で。
おー、京都綺麗よ。
Mm,
行ったことある ?Have you been there?
yeah.
おー、
No,
そう
I haven't been to
よ。
Japan.
懐かしいな、日本。I miss Japan. Yeah, it was great. I got to live there 3 years in Tokyo. So
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Great.
wonderful. Oh, the yeah, what a great linguistically alone. Learning Japanese since I think is great since it's a millions of people speak the language, but it's so very different from European languages and similar. It's very similar to ancient Greek.
Interesting. That's good to know.
Yeah.
I noticed some similarities with Japanese. For example, the fact that we would refer to someone we don't know as like grandmother, grandfather, uncle, aunt. We do that too, and I think it's kind of unique.
Really, you do that in Bulgarian?
We do, yeah, absolutely.
Wow. That's cool. Yeah, because Japanese do it like waitress or waiter is older brother, older sister, or it's kind of it's interesting, very interesting, that kind of usage of that terminology like that. Whereas in English, it sounds like "Hey, grandma."
Yeah, it sounds strange.
It's very offensive sounding in English.
You get used to it, but yeah, like when you meet an older woman in the street, it's gonna be Baba.
Absolutely.
And you also have like some term with the, which is very similar to Japanese actually. You have like kaka is someone that is older than you, and like it's some sort of like, but it's more like some.
Yes, it's
it's friendly. It's like some
just the way we have with aunt and uncle and grandmother, grandfather. We also have a person that's around our age. We would say kaka and bate. And it's mostly used for brother and sister, but not only, it can be anyone.
Bate brother?
Yeah.
And kaka is for older sister, huh? Interesting. I can't figure out the etymology of that one. I wonder where that's from, because your sostry is sisters in Russian. I don't know the word in Bulgarian, but
Sistra. Yeah, it's not related. I even think it's the other way around. Like it's meant to be just someone that's a little bit older than you, but we use it mostly for sister.
Cool. Very cool.
All right. So I've taken out like 5 short quotations, like sentences really, or phrases, and in all these 3 languages. So I would like to ask you how the Latin compares to them.
Sure.
So the first one is because the elders say, car nos anciens disent. In French, que secondo que dicono gli anziani, and los viejos dicen que. So obviously the same roots in the French and Italian, but viejos, just the old in Spanish, so very different. Then the Italian grammar is a bit more complicated, which according to that which the elderly say. So how about the Latin? How does it compare?
Well, the Latin's been, of course, restructured in a very normal syntactically prose way. So it's not like poetic, which I think the others are a bit more poetic. But yeah, here Calpurniam tangere, touch Calpurnia with the whip, because this is the in February. The February itself is named after this celebration, which is a fertility festival. And because like it's related to febris, to fever, and so a fever, not necessarily of illness, but of passion, of So, and therefore fertility. So, calpurniam tangere fertur anima bandiquis. So, the fertur anima bandiquis, which I think is that line in the English you were asking about, fertur means literally it is carried, it is born, fertur, and enim, for, because. It's just the second word. So, because it is carried. Well, carried idiomatically, fertur in Latin means to say something by tradition. For example, fertur. What's a good example of a fertur? Fertur. Think of something that's good. Sorry, to think of a really good one. Fertur inspector Clouseau non esse gallum. Like it said that Inspector Clouseau is not French or something, right? So
Yeah.
it's like you hear something
definitely.
told. It's about fertur. It's like it is said. Literally, it's carried, but it's carried by voices. It's said. So fertur abantiquis, from the ancients, from the ancient people. And the English again, I'm seeing here, yeah, for our elders say. It was just that line, right? To touch Calpurnia for our elders say. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, and I have a couple of others. So the French, quand César dit faites cela, cela est fait. Cesare deve solo dir fa questo ed è fatto. Si dice César eso harás, se hace. So the direct speech is introduced differently in the three languages, like when, if, and he just has to say. And also, I like the grammar because we see an imperative and also we see a passive voice. So how is the Latin here?
Very similar. I'm looking at the French now. Quand César dit, exactly like, well, actually similar. I think actually it's indicative in the Romance languages here. Dove, ecco, signore, quando, where's Antonio? Where does he say that? Dove lui, Cesare, Antonio, he says, deve solo dir fa questo ed è fatto. Yeah, he only has to say. So it's, yeah, the English is, again, when, right? When Caesar says, because that's where it's all coming from, right? Because you take the English and then you get to interpret it. When Caesar says do this, it is performed. Yeah, so that, of course, they're all idiomatically, and I think some of them are poetically translated, right? Of those romance. Are all of them in verse? Or are they, or some of the prose? I wasn't looking very carefully, so I'm not sure.
I'm pretty sure they're in prose, actually.
Yeah, they're in prose.
Okay, so they're not restricted by syllable numbers, so they can be more directly translated and not rephrased. Like the Latin in this case. So Caesar, literally when Caesar, and then dixerit is the future perfect. So avrà detto in Italian, will have said, avrà detto. Or it's actually the same as the perfect subjunctive, which would be avesse detto or avrebbe detto in Italian, to use a Romance language I'm most familiar with. So it could be either, but here it's it implies completeness. When Caesar will have said something, when it's already said by Caesar, factum est, it is done. And the factum est is like, looks like I saw the è fatto in Italian, and is it effet in the French?
Yeah, effet, yeah.
Effet, okay, it's just effet, so it's exactly like the Latin.
Okay, yeah. Prendre effet, yeah, but well, how should I put, like, yeah, it's basically, it's you need to like take effects. I don't know, it's like yeah, literally that would be it.
Yeah. And the Latin, though, is fiat, which of course is a car, and fiat is Latin for let it be so. And because it's the verb Latin word facere, faire in French and fare, hacer in Spanish. That verb facere, to do, has a passive form which looks a little different. Fit means it is done. instead of si fa or something like Italian does. It's just feet. And then fiat is the subjunctive form. And the subjunctive is, as it's used in other Romance languages, like let it be so, let it be done. So fiat means let it be done. So cum Caesar xerit fiat, when Caesar will have said, let it be done, factum, it's already done.
All right, great. Okay, the next one, very short one. Chi m'appelle, chi mi chiama tra la folla, and chien llama. So quite similar, but I'm supposing llamar, chiamare really have a common root, while the French appel is different. Also, the Italian has added in the crowd, and also the Spanish doesn't have the
is that
call me. It just has quien llama. There's no direct object.
Right. In the English is who is it in this press that calls on me? Of course, with the rhythm, who is it in this press that calls on me? With those the syllables arranged like that. And in Latin is just qui sexturba me appellat. So of course Latin has all those verbs. It has the version of chiamare and chiamar, and it has appeler. It has them, and this version is of course we're not translating from the Latin to the Romance, but it's although it's we kind of think of it that way. The appellat, appellare, just like appeler in French means to call, but there's more than one word. In Latin we could say vocare, and we can also say appellare, and another word would be clamare, which isn't very much a classical usage. Clamare is it's to shout. When that's how it becomes the vulgar Latin, that is the non-standard classical Latin version of to call. And words like vocare, vocare instead just falls out of usage, whereas appellare remains obviously in French as the word for calling, and clamare, to shout, becomes the default word in llamar, chiamare, and other Romance. So here we see the Latin one appellat, just like French, but we could have also said quis vocat, who calls, vocare, and that would also work. They're synonyms essentially with some small variation. And exturba, the turba is the I think it was folla. Was it folla? Yes, folla. And the press, meaning the press of people, the pressed together group of people, the crowd.
Yeah, the crowd.
To press or to crowd together, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay, the next one. Un meneur devant moi que je vois son visage.
You keep changing languages on me. I have to find where you are.
Sorry, I should have written the line.
It's okay. I'm doing fine.
Toward the
I'll
end.
get it.
Che venga qui, voglio vederlo in faccia. Tráiganlo aquí, le quiero ver el rostro. So like the French and the Spanish, like bring him, but the Italian is more like may he come. The French also has a subjunctive.
Set him before me, let me see his face, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Got it.
Yeah.
And also in terms of vocabulary, like his face is just so different in the three languages, visage, faccia, and rostro. So I'm curious about the Latin. And also the French is literally see his face, but then the Italian and Spanish are a bit more complex, like see the face of him, something like really a different construction that can't be rendered in English. So can you please tell us about the Latin?
With pleasure. So I'm trying to, where did the English go again? Where is it? Set him before me. Let me see his face. So yeah, the idea, because as we've noted, and you actually, I think, I don't do translation. Do you, either you do translation?
Yeah.
You do actual translation. I don't, but as you know, it's sort of like what I like to, when I do with translation, think of what's really happening, and then use the words that make the most sense instead of necessarily you can depend on the original terms
Yeah.
here, but here he's saying, what does he say again in English? Set him before me. So let me see his face. Those are two ways of saying the same thing, that Caesar desires to have this guy put in front of him so he can see him. And so to see his face. So in Latin, a great idiom, a great way to say that is simply cora. Cora means face to face. Technically, this is cora, though in modern Latin we think of cora not as zoom. That's sort of something we've developed in our modern usage. Cora sounds like you're physically in front of each other. Although in the future, I think we'll just get used to this being face to face. So cora means face to face. It means in front of someone's face. It's an adverb. It means in person. It means in person. It means face to face. And even live, it can have that kind of feeling as well. And adu kite is an imperative, meaning bring. So adu kite, koram adu kite, bring in front of my face, and in front of the face of someone's face. Actually, the word face isn't even used. Just koram, which means bring. So he's before me. Koram me, in front of me. Kora adu kite ut intuear, in order that I, and intuear, intueri is a verb for seeing, and it is synonym like videre or aspicere, aspectare, and it's just means to see, essentially, and it's where intuition comes from. Because intuition, it sounds like it's internal because of the in, but in Latin, at least in English, it does to my ear. I always thought it was like, oh, it's like intuition. But in English, in Latin, it may have come from that, but in normal Latin usage, it just means to look at. It's the in is more like what you're looking at, even though because we use intuition to mean like an internal sense of thinking. But that's actually accidental. In English, at least, the Latin usage of intueri just means to look into that. So if I am vos, like vuestras facies intuior, I look into your faces, which is true, which is what I'm doing right now. Vuestras facies intuior, and just I want to, but that's all kind of just in this intuiar. It just is a synonym for in order that I see.
Okay, great. And the last one, it's really by the end. C'est un visionnaire, laissons-le passant, e un visionario. Se lasci andare e si prosegua avanti, un soñador, dejémosle adelante. So the Spanish soñador, like coming from like to dream, is different in terms of vocabulary than to say like let's go. The French is really conjugated like passant, but then the other two are more like fixed expressions. Also, there's a bit of a gradation, like the French requires the whole c'est un visionnaire, while in the Spanish there's no need for the se, like the way there is normally no need for pronouns, just the Italian è un visionario, and the Spanish is just an incomplete sentence, un soñador, and that's it.
Actually, the French looks that directly like the English, and the because he is a dreamer. Let us leave pass. So
that's what you mentioned earlier. C'est un visionnaire, like that. You have this,
c'est ton visionnaire. Let's go. So in Latin, is because the English is a dreamer. Now in the Romance languages, evidently because a dreamer, certainly here in the Shakespearean English, and I think modern English works too, is a sense of he's crazy, or he's he's not really normally, he's not conscious. He's the way the rest of us are thinking and normally conscious in this crowd. He's dreaming. He's nuts. So in Latin, we're using the verb somniatiste. He is dreaming, and iste is just is that guy. Somniatiste. Eamus. Let's go. Keeps it real simple, and which is appropriate too, because Caesar's Latin that he actually wrote in is typified by its brevity and its clarity. So it makes sense for his Latin here to be similarly clear, simple, unadorned, because that's what he was known for.
Yes.
Yeah.
I see. Well, interesting. Yeah.
Okay.
And
So
yeah, it's just like someone having visions also like convey this notion of like madness as well.
Exactly.
Like, having visions,
It does
basically.
carry that weight in French. He's a madness.
Actually, it's a more neutral. It's a more neutral word most of the time. If you say that for example, someone could very well say that someone like Mark Zuckerberg is a visionary. Like someone that.
That's how we
like
use it in
business,
English, right?
like
Visionary.
creative.
But it can also be used in a derogatory manner as well. So yeah.
And I don't see a reason why it can't have a similar feeling even for Shakespeare, because the reality is that this person, the soothsayer, the Haruspex, was in the play, and I think it's even recorded historically that there was someone predicting this. The people who was saying this. Now, if there was an historical soothsayer who was in fact actually told Caesar this, I think Plutarch talks about it. I have to check. He may have heard about the conspiracy, because they were planning this for a while, I think a few weeks, the conspirators. So in any case, the idea is that he's a dreamer, making dream into reality. If I had to, maybe I'm putting too much into it, but I think it's a bit of Shakespeare, who is a visionary. He's a dreamer. He's a creator in his mind, and he makes something into reality. Artists, I think, tend to put that idea of the creator being an artist into their own works a lot, as a kind of ego self-reinforcement. But
that's super interesting.
I don't know. I'm just thinking about it now.
No, it's
maybe the film equivalent would be like the director. No, like the director appearing in some really secondary role.
Yeah, like Peter Jackson. He always has a cameo, and his little adorable little Hobbit children are also in The Lord of the Rings and in every movie.
Yeah, fair.
Cool. Fun.
Okay, so let us move on to the Greek. So once again,
that's a Colossus now.
I would ask you to please read the ancient Greek first, and then I'll ask Alex to read the English, so he does something.
Thank you.
And I'll try to read the modern Greek.
Very good, yeah. And again, like I mentioned before, I'm not familiar with this play at all, except the concept of Oedipus, and so we'll do my best here. So
actually, we prepared.
If you're being adventurous, there is a very good like the French version has been written by a guy called Jean Anouilh, and he really put of himself in the play. Like you can really feel the tragedy of like Antigone. So yeah, that's a great version. Like I would recommend that one.
Excellent. Yeah. And when did he do it? Like around
He
Molière's
wrote
time?
it during World War II. So
okay. So
there was a lot on his mind, obviously, and you can really feel the tragic aspect of it. Like it's that was really, I don't know, one of my big literary moments like when in high school. So they're really good. Yeah, it's a great play. Well,
cool. All right. So from the beginning here, so the way that because as we talked about before, ancient languages can be pronounced in any convention. There is a traditional pronunciation of Latin that's used in, say, for example, Bulgaria. Actually, I was just thinking about one of my favorite modern Latin speakers and authors, Milena Minkova. I have 3 of her books. One, and here is another one that she co-wrote with the great Terence Thunberg, and even a third. So Milena Minkova is Bulgarian, speaks beautiful and writes beautiful Latin. And she, along with Terence Thunberg, runs one of the most famous, I'd say important, schools that is entirely in Latin at the university level in Lexington, Kentucky. And I've been there a few times. They have annual conventions for a week where you can come and be totally immersed in Latin. They're super cool. And I bring that up because the way Milena speaks Latin is with, for the most part, the traditional or standard scholastic Bulgarian way of doing it, which is actually definitely a close to an historical version as well. Notably, what's an example? She would pronounce I, like Caesar, as just Caesar, which actually a lot of ancient Romans were doing too. It's not, so, but there's also other pronunciations which are not historical, which are simply conventional. For example, I do have a recording actually, Alex, of Latin in the 15th century French pronunciation, reconstructed, which is different from even the modern way. So each country has its own traditional way. For example, saying César, even in Latin, even pronouncing Caesar as César was just the way to do it for hundreds of years. And there's nothing wrong with it at all. And I bring that up because whereas even a majority of Italians have accepted that classical Latin is pronounced in a certain way, that's not the case for the Greeks in particular. In fact, they often are taught that any attempt to reconstruct an ancient pronunciation of their language by, say, Western Europeans is an attempt to take their identity from them. Simply put, they feel like it's unbelievably, they're extremely, to the point of verbal violence against the idea of even thinking that the pronunciation of the language has changed at all in 2,500 years. They don't accept it, rarely. So now plenty do, because they've learned about it, they've read the books, they understand linguistic science, but many just reject it out of hand because of that powerful nationalistic drive that has been in part of their culture for a long time. And then, like I was saying before, for a lot of good reasons. Not bad at all. It just that's what this is part of. So I bring that up because no doubt we'll have some Greeks see this, and I love Greeks, and I love modern Greek a lot myself. I don't know it nearly as well as ancient Greek, but so it probably would be worthwhile to demonstrate more than one pronunciation for some of these lines for the whole page if you really wanted. But because there's different ways to do it. Now, way I normally read ancient Greek is with a pronunciation that would fit in the early Roman Empire or late Roman Republic, and it's called Lucian pronunciation. And other people are more familiar with a restored 5th century BC Attic pronunciation, which is when this is from. And others still might know some other conventional pronunciation or the modern Greek pronunciation. So let's start with the first line here. I would read this, okoinon auftadelphon ismenes kara. That's how I normally would say it. Now the modern Greek pronunciation would basically read each letter as if it's a modern Greek letter combination. So okinon auftadelphon ismenis kara. So the biggest difference is there with, like, say, isminis, modern Greek pronunciation, ismenes, koine. If you've heard that before, koine, which means period of Greek literature that's after classical, from the 3rd century BC to like the 6th century AD. Basically, the Roman Republican Empire time of Greek is essentially like the Bible is written koine in Greek, which is very much the same as the classical. It's just slightly different. But the pronunciation is changing. So modern isminis, and then that ita is pronounced eta. So I say ismenes, but if you go back to the classical Attic when this was written, it was ismanas, like parfait, ismanes, instead of chanter or chanter. It's like that kind of difference. That's changing throughout the centuries, and we can actually have good evidence for that. So and then the oi in guinon. So I say oi. Modern, it's e. Before that, so it's e. The omicron iota is e in modern Greek. But even a few hundred years ago, even a few decades ago, you could find dialects of modern Greek where it was still pronounced u. Just like French u, la lune, that still existed very recently, but it's been since extinguished through rather impressive standardization efforts from Athens. So that u is pretty much gone. It was just like, that's just how the grandma talks, but now it's dead. So no one says u anymore, but it did exist apparently very recently. And so, but it was u in Byzantine medieval Greek, so it was gynon. if you go back further, you get to what I do, which is guinon, guinon. But then if you go back to classical Attic, 5th century BC, it's goinon, 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 like that. So, and then the alpha epsilon is classical Attic, 5th century BC, au, by Roman period, auf, and then later af, like the modern pronunciation. So it goes through those transformations. So, and we'll hear those sounds again and again. The next line, aroistha hotizeoston apoidipu kakon. Now I'm thinking of all these pronunciations. So aroistha. So there's the ui. Again, I say ui, modern Greek, modern pronunciation, which I'll do because I'm very consciously and very openly placating modern Greeks. So all the Greeks, hierapoli, I'm definitely doing that because. So I'm not covering the fact that I'm deliberately trying to make them happy. I am definitely deliberately doing that. So so that they feel like I'm not trying to steal anything from them, because they'll feel that way. Areisto otizevs ton ab idipu kakon. Right, and what I said before, aroisto hotiozeos ton oidipu kakon. So just some small differences. And the diphthongs in particular, what changed. So instead, classical oi becomes oy, becomes u, becomes e. And then eu becomes eu, becomes ev. Another one is delta. With delta, we say modern Greek pronunciation. So the pronunciation actually started during the Roman times. So that's why I say oidipu. But you go back farther, it's oidipu, like a normal d sound, oidipu. Let me do a little bit more here. So, hopuyon uchinon etijosain teli, ulengar utan alginon, uta atis ater, uta aischron, ut atimon estopoyonu, ton shon de kakon, ut opopego kakon, kernun. There's no one k. So alpha iota is just e in modern Greek, and that e pronunciation, just like Milena Minkova, who pronounces Latin not Caesar but Caesar, that was happening in ancient Greek as well. So I said ke. Modern Greek is ke, but there was an ancient form of ke as well. So ke nunti tutau fasi pandemo poli gerung ma Thinai ton strategon artios echisti ki sekusas eselanthani pros tus philus stichon taton echthron kaka is mene. Emoimen udis mythos Antigone philon uthedus I don't know this word, alginus, right? Alginos hidex hotu diuin adelphuin esterete mendio mia thanantoin hemera diple heri epide frudos estin argion stratos enucti te union uden oid hyperteron ut eu tychus amalon ute atomene edikakos kai sectos auvillon pylon tutu hunek excepempton hos mone cluis. All right. There's more. Oh no.
We stop here.
Yeah. You took me by surprise with one of the most difficult pieces of Greek literature you possibly could have. So it's okay. Whereas the other one I'd read before.
What you plan.
And I know Latin way better than I know ancient Greek, but it's okay. I can talk more about ancient Greek phonology than I can.
Yeah, me too. The modern Greek also, I would really struggle reading the whole thing. So.
You'll do better than me. Is modern Greek next?
Not sure.
Yeah.
Let us see. All right, so it's until. Can you read the English, please? It's right here.
Now you can make fun of me for my pronunciation.
And can stop like here.
All right. So, do you say prologue in English?
Yeah, I say prologue is how I say it in my
Ah.
general American pronunciation, prologue. But if I were to imitate a British accent, I would say prologue. So take your pick.
I see. Prologue.
Sounds good to me.
Prologue. I don't know what to just say.
C'est bien.
Okay, fair. Antigone and Ismene enter from the central door of the palace. Ismene, dear sister, you would think that we had already suffered enough for the curse on Oedipus. I cannot imagine any grief that you and I have not gone through. And now, have they told you of the new decree of our King Creon? I have heard nothing. I know that two sisters lost two brothers, a double death in a single hour. And I know that the Argive army fled in the night, but beyond this, nothing. I thought so, and that is why I wanted you to come out here with me. There's something we must do, and the something we must do is burying the second brother.
But no, there's a long
Yeah.
text before it actually gets to the point.
All right, I see.
Okay, so I'll read. I hope it will be the same part. I'm a little confused, but it will be more or less the same part.
That was very
Oh
ambitious.
yeah, I just read the first page. You're doing the modern Greek, Iglika?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I just read the first page of the green page here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Polyagapimeni adelphi μου Ismini arahe ξέρεις αν υπάρχει καμία συμφορά που μας κληροδότησε η δίποδας και να μην την έστειλε ο Δίας σε μας τις δύο που ακόμη είμαστε στη ζωή, γιατί τίποτε δεν υπάρχει ούτε δυσάρεστο ούτε γεμάτο συμφορές, ούτε αισχρό, ούτε επονίδιστο που εγώ να μην έχω δει μέσα στα δικά σου και τα δικά μου βάσανα. Και τώρα τι είναι πάλι αυτή η διαταγή που λένε σ' ολόκληρη την πόλη ότι διακήρυξε ο στρατηγός πριν από λίγο. Ξέρεις τίποτε και έχεις ακούσει ή σου διαφεύγει την προσοχή ότι απολούν τους αγαπημένους μας κακά που ταιριάζουν στους εχθρούς. Σε μένα τουλάχιστον Αντιγόνη, για τους αγαπημένους μας καμία είδηση δεν έφτασε, ούτε ευχάριστη ούτε δυσάρεστη από τότε που εμείς οι δύο στερηθήκαμε τα δύο μας αδέρφια που σκοτώθηκαν σε μία μέρα με αμοιβαίο φόνο και από τότε που ο στράτος των Αργίων τράπηκε σε φυγή τη νύχτα αυτή, τίποτε περισσότερο δεν ξέρω, ούτε ότι είμαι πιο ευτυχισμένη, ούτε πιο δυστυχισμένη. Ήμουνα σίγουρη και σε κάλεσα να έρθεις στις εξώπορτες του ανάκτορου.
So, how was it?
Fun.
Tough.
Yeah, a lot better than I could have done with the modern Greek.
Okay, since I don't understand much to start with, even from the modern Greek, I had prepared some really basic points to discuss. Firstly, the most common words or even letters and punctuation, I can say that there is a variety. The very typical semicolon instead of question mark, I can see it in the ancient Greek too. I don't know how well this can be documented.
We traditionally we use the same punctuation as modern Greek. Just the accent marks are different, but
Right.
otherwise the comma, semicolon, central dot are all like modern Greek.
And some specific words and phrases that beginner learners of Greek would know, would they be generally similar? Like in the very beginning, I can sense adelphi mu, my sister, then occasionally a ke, which is and, expressions like δεν ξέρω, I don't know. How similar are they in the ancient Greek?
Yeah, xero is not xero comes from a different verb that I don't remember what its origin is off the top of my head. It's not in the xero itself is not in ancient Greek. Adelphi is, so we see in the first line aftadelphon. It's actually rendered here more like ukoinadelphon. Yeah, it's more adjectively rendered as well. So, but that's not that important. So this aufta part is like my own, and it's put as a prefix very poetically onto the noun. Like Latin could do that, like consoror or and that's just what it is. Consoror, my with sister of mine. Kind of like how Spanish does consoprino, the con in front of it. And yeah, confrater, my fellow brother kind of thing. That's what that's doing. So that's a little odd, but the adelf, that's definitely there. Adelf meaning or aderf, which is the as more standard, more common modern Greek is to say aderfi instead of adelfi. So we see the rhoticization of la to ra, which is interesting. Aderfi. Yeah.
That's super.
Yeah.
The next set of words that I'm interested in is the words that we know from English or other languages that have passed their roots onto other languages, so they're easy to catch. Like at some point we have within the same couple of lines, maybe cosmos, world, necros, dead, taphi, buried, like epitaph, for example.
Yeah.
Would they be the same in the ancient Greek?
Yes. Absolutely. So and are those where are those words? I'm looking for them. Necros.
They might be in the next part.
Okay, let's look at it. We can look at it. Let's see. Where's the for? Yeah, there was some
around 25, around line 25.
On 25. Do you have numbers? I don't have. Oh, there. Oh, yeah, there. There, I got it. There's 9. Yeah, necrus. Yeah, necrois. And here it's in the dative case, necrois. In the ancient Greek, whereas, of course, the dative case is not a part of normal modern Greek. It is in katharevousa, which is, we talked about, isn't really modern Greek. It's modernized ancient Greek. So necrus, yeah, necrus, necrois, we see it right there. Direct correspondence, same meaning.
Okay, and finally, I was thinking, just giving an example of a whole sentence. I marked line 20. It's the very beginning of the second page.
Got it. Mm-hmm.
Second. Yeah, so it's like the Greek means something like what is going on, what is torturing you, but then the English was completely different. Like, have you gone crazy, I think, or something like this. So I was curious about the ancient Greek.
Yeah, it's this verb that I'm honestly not familiar with. It's kalchaino, which from kalche, from calc, like yeah, to make trouble, like a stormy sea. Interesting. Kalchaino, yeah, there it is, kalchaino. Yeah. Oh, avoir la couleur foncée de la pourpre. Avoir une teinte sombre. I love these dictionaries. Être sombre, être plongé dans des réflexions, méditer profondément quelque chose. An etymology is from calche, which is the purple dye, like porphyra.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and so it's they. So who are they? So ti so ti is what, just like modern Greek. They is like but. So what is it then? Like what's wrong? Ti what's wrong? De Luis Gardi de Luis de los de Luis, the accents on the ois. De los means clear. De Luis with the X. Oh no, it's de Luis. Oh, I know what's going on. Okay. Because it's dichnis. All right, it's a different verb entirely. Hoti kapja idis sinidi. And that's who's talking here. This is Ismeni's line. Why do you speak so right? The Luis. So the law, that verb means the law is to make clear. So the Luis is you make clear. And this is it looks like it's the participle. Epos. The participle, which is not a feature of modern Greek either in this particular type of participle. It's so those who trouble, karchai nontes, but it's karchai nusi, and then it's elided at the end. Epos. So you make clear to those troubled the epos. That's yeah. Yeah, not super familiar with this form of Greek. This because it's also poetry. You gave me prose before. Yeah, and it's it's fast, and we can see. I mean, this is a perfect example. You give this to a modern Greek speaker, and they'll get a lot, but syntactically, there's a lot that's different as well. And even though studying ancient Greek for a while, but by no means have I achieved the same level as I have in Latin. Greek is inherently harder to learn mostly because of the methods aren't very good. There's some good ones out there, but you have to like cobble stuff together. Whereas Latin, there's like one book, you read that book, you're good. In Greek, it's not like that. Ancient Greek, that is. Yeah, so literally I can make out the pieces, but I'm not familiar with this idiom. It could simply be an idiomatic expression, which is means exactly as it means in the English translation. And tell me again the modern Greek. So, di simveni, what does simveni mean? Looks like shumbaini, which means to walk together, to go together.
I think it's like what's going on.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Che in Italian, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then yati, why? Dichnis, do you show? Is that show? What is dichnis?
Not sure.
Dichnis oti kapia. Dichnis. Dich, let me try
Unfortunately,
my dich no.
not much help.
Indicate. Yeah, so it's just like de Luis.
Yeah.
So it's just a
Mm.
synonymous translation of de Luis, de Lis,
Yeah.
de Lis in ancient Greek. You demonstrate or you make clear. Otikapia. And what's this EDC? What's EDC mean? EDC. 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 Got it. EDC is event. Okay.
Uh-huh.
EDC. Well, that'll go with the epos. Say vasa. And what does vasanizi mean?
I think that's like torturing or
Mm.
something.
Well, that would go with the purpling
Mhm.
that we
Yeah.
saw before. Yeah, it says to investigate the torture.
Uh-huh.
And to
Mm.
torture and investigate.
Mm.
And say is in, right? Or no, it's you. It tortures
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
Okay, and EDC is the news. So why do you show that such news tortures you?
Mm.
Is the modern Greek, right?
Yes,
So,
yes.
Mm.
Veloizgardi, maybe because the karchianusi is either the verb they trouble or it is the participle to the ones troubled, to the ones
Uh-huh.
troubling.
Mm.
Okay.
But I think it's
Mm.
probably the
Mhm.
verb now that
Mhm.
Veloizgardi karchianusi epos.
Yeah.
And epos is something said, the
Uh-huh.
news,
Mm.
Yeah.
like epic.
Yeah.
I mean, that's epic,
Yeah.
Mm.
epos.
Mm.
Epikos. Yeah,
Mm.
interesting.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. I'm sorry about that. I knew the play, but
Yes.
my Greek is very limited.
Oh, mine too. Mine is quite.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm in.
Mm.
I do love ancient Greek and modern Greek a lot. It just takes time, especially when it's not
Yeah.
the direct descendant of another language I speak fluently, or
Mhm.
antecedent, I should say.
Yeah.
Yeah, fun, super
Okay,
fun.
Oh.
so
Yeah.
I don't
Oh,
have
yeah, and I
any
see
more
the
questions
tafel.
about the Greek.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to ask?
Well, no, that was I actually that I really wanted to see how it would pan out, like ancient Greek and modern Greek, and I see that. I wonder if they don't keep like some ambivalence about it. It's like, yeah, of course it's about the same, but when you actually dig deep down, it's not that straightforward.
Yes, this
So
is easy to feel,
that's-
isn't it?
yeah, that's the only thing I was kind of curious about. So yeah.
Yeah, they're especially with translation,
Mm.
we can see. I mean, something like this really demonstrates, especially with how, like, you just look, and I mean, I'm just looking now, and I find, for the most part, almost no word correspondences between the ancient
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
modern Greek versions, just
Mm.
because. Whereas I honestly think you usually see more between Latin and Italian or Latin and French,
Yes.
because people
Mm.
seem to
Definitely.
consistently, as traditionally, they insist that ancient Greek and modern Greek are more closely related than, say, Italian and Latin. But in some ways they are, in some ways they aren't. Because what defines the language? Modern Greek is so steeped in the ancient version of its language with expressions to the point where they were writing in ancient Greek effectively until a short time ago.
Mm.
That modern people using the language, the boundaries are so deliberately removed between the ancient and modern usages of the language that they give, especially well-educated modern speakers, the feeling like, oh yeah, it's all Greek and therefore all my language. Whereas when, especially, this is really, with translation, clarifies that, I'd even see, but of course there's different word order because the syntax is really different.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to find like tafo. I saw the tafo here in the ancient, and I'm looking for the modern tafo or tafus or something, but I don't even see it mentioned here. The nekrus, there are some, but gosh, they are few, surprisingly few.
Yeah.
Some of them. Fun. Yeah.
All right. So thank you so much, Luke, for this discussion. It has been so crazy
Yeah,
day.
extremely
Interesting for us.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm delighted.
Awesome.
I'm always happy to talk about these things, and I'm excited for everything you're doing on your channel as well. It's really great. Yeah, keep it up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If you have any questions for us, we can also answer them.
Yeah. Well, we gotta. What do you want to do? We should do another one about the
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's do that. Do them about the Balkan Sprachbunds in particular, which I only have a smattering of learning. I mean, I guess the Greek is the most I know of that part, because there are some, of course, Greeky things in there as well. But of course, Romanian has post positive articles, as does Bulgarian.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? And the other similarities that are there are just super interesting. So yeah, that'd be great. And I have some stuff I could read up on before we talk about it. So.
And I would learn a lot, actually. Yeah.
Great. Well,
okay,
thanks so
that's
much.
great.
Thank you too.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you very much for your time. That was great, and thanks again. And yeah, we'll be delighted to do that again. Yeah, definitely.
Sounds great.
All right. So cheers, and we'll of course link your channel as well. Like
wonderful. As well, and I'll put your video on my channel so people can go see.
Thank you.
Well, thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
have a good day.
Yeah.
You as well.
Bye.
Yeah, enjoy your day. Bye. See ya.
Bye.
See ya.